I suspect that our guest will need no introduction. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you on behalf of the Wilson Center's Environmental Change and Security Program and the Africa Program here at the Wilson Center, and Lee Hamilton, the director of the Wilson Center, for today's event featuring Wangari Maathai. We're delighted to host Dr. Maathai for this discussion about her new book, The Challenge for Africa. Before introducing Dr. Maathai, we want to thank the International Gateway at the Ronald Reagan Building International Trade Center for hosting this event, and especially the USAID Office of Population and Reproductive Health for their generous support of Wilson Center programming. Now I'd like to introduce Andrew Gelfuso, Executive Director of International Gateway and member of the Executive Committee for Trade Center Management Associates. In addition to his role with International Gateway and Trade Center Management, Mr. Gelfuso serves on the Quality and Standards Committee for the World Trade Center Association and the International Steering Committee for the Washington Network Group. Mr. Gelfuso.
Thank you, Dr. Wolpe. It's always a pleasure to work with you and your colleagues at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center today. I'd like to extend a special welcome to our featured guest, Ms. Wangari Maathai, the influential visionary behind the Greenbelt movement. My name is Andrew Gelfuso, Director of the International Gateway. This is the trade arm here at the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center. It's not every day we host a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and we're certainly pleased to have Ms. Maathai with us today. It gives me great pleasure also to have all of you with us for what promises to be an insightful discussion regarding the intricacies of the challenging issues facing Africa. Very briefly, I'd like to give you some background about this facility. This is a 3.1 million square foot award-winning facility that's a special project of the U.S. General Services Administration and the official international trade center of the U.S. government. The facility was designed to foster and create opportunities for global commerce. As a result, we hold hundreds of cutting-edge seminars, exhibits, and networking sessions, all open to the public every year. We have a healthy mix of public and private sector tenants, including offices of the U.S. Department of Commerce, USAID, and EPA. We're also home to the Washington International Trade Association, the U.S.-Mexico Chamber of Commerce, and many other public and private sector organizations. We work closely with U.S. government trade agencies, the nonprofit community, and private sector to host various events in the building. For our partners, such as the Wilson Center, we promote events through e-blasts, we post events on our website, and we draft articles for numerous newsletters to raise awareness for various causes. If you're interested in learning more or joining our mailing list, I would encourage you to take a look at the literature at the table in the back. In fact, if you do have a moment to stop at the literature table, I would strongly encourage you to pick up a flyer for an event that we're co-hosting this Friday with the television show In Cafe with Mocha, featuring an interview with President of Liberia, Her Excellency Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Our facility is also the World Trade Center for Washington, D.C. This is a non-profit, non-political association that facilitates international trade by bringing together importers and exporters. The World Trade Center Association has offices in 300 cities and 100 countries around the world, and we count ourselves fortunate to have such committed partners. I, like many of you, am really looking forward to hearing Ms. Maathai discuss her groundbreaking experience as Africa's first female Nobel Peace Prize recipient, as well as her new book. With that said, I will now turn the program back over to Dr. Howard Wolpe. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Andrew. And just for those of you who may be new to this institution, let me just say a very brief word about the Wilson Center itself. It was established in 1968 by an act of Congress to serve as a living memorial to President Woodrow Wilson. Unlike the physical monuments in the nation's capital, it's a living memorial whose work and scholarship commemorates the ideals and concerns of Woodrow Wilson. For those of you who may not be aware of this, Wilson was the only American president who held a PhD, was a university president and university professor. And so we aim to bridge the gap here between the world of ideas and the world of public policy. We are a nonpartisan institute for advanced study, a neutral forum for open, serious, and informed dialogue. And within the Wilson Center itself, the Environmental Change and Security Program and the Africa Program have worked hard to establish a reputation for being important links of policy discussion. Promoting dialogue among Washington's policymakers and academics. And the ESP and that is the Environmental Project and the Africa Program have a long history of this kind of collaboration. Development has been the focus of international interactions with Africa since the end of the colonial period, but with too little thought given to long-term sustainability. Without understanding how to balance human and ecosystem needs, efforts that have been made by the international community, by African states themselves, are often counterproductive and even retrogressive. But there is a woman from Africa who has understood these connections for decades. Dr. Maathai began to fight for Africa and for Africans in her own small way initially, starting to build within her own community, and watching these efforts turn into a national and global movement to alert the world to pressing environmental issues. Born in Nyerere, Kenya, Dr. Maathai was the first woman to earn a doctorate degree in East or Central Africa and has pursued degrees in Kenya, the United States, and Germany. She founded the Greenbelt movement in 1977 and has worked with networks of rural women to plant millions of trees across Kenya. She has taught veterinary anatomy at the University of Kenya, where she completed her doctoral work, becoming chair of the department in 1976. She was active in the National Council of Women from 76 to 87, acting as chairwoman during a large portion of that period. She was the chair of the Jubilee 2000 Africa campaign, championed debt cancellation for African countries. Dr. Maathai was elected to Kenya's parliament in 2002 in the first free election in over a decade, and was appointed Assistant Minister for Environment, Natural Resources, and Wildlife. I don't have to tell you the fact that she was Assistant Minister rather than Minister was a point of some contention in Nairobi at the time. She is the 2004 Nobel Peace Prize laureate and the author of Unbowed, a memoir, and will be featured in the PBS documentary airing tomorrow night called Taking Root, The Vision of Wangari Maathai, which traces the Greenbelt movement since its inception and the amazing successes Dr. Maathai has had with her grassroots work in Kenya. Her book, The Challenge for Africa, is a unique publication in the canon of literature on Africa because it is written by a woman and furthermore by someone who has remained in Africa for almost the entirety of her life. She understands the challenges of poverty firsthand and has worked on the ground in academia and in the government. Now I would like to introduce the director of the Environmental Change and Security Program, Jeff Debelko, who will be discussing Dr. Maathai's newest book, The Challenge for Africa, with her. Jeff has worked for the past 18 years to facilitate dialogue among policymakers, practitioners, journalists, and scholars, grappling with the complex links between environment, population, development, conflict, and security. Jeff, the platform is yours.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Howard. Dr. Maathai, this is a real honor. It's one that comes from such rich contributions you're making with this book, The Challenge for Africa, a book that's clearly a very personal book, and one that speaks truth to power in every quarter and at every level, and offers many topics for conversation, and so that's what we'll jump into today. You start your book with the idea that many people and many communities in Africa have gotten on the wrong bus and are driving away from where they need to go. And so can you tell us what you mean by this notion of a wrong bus syndrome and what must be done to get the bus back on track?
Thank you very much. I'm very, very honored and privileged to be here at this beautiful building, and thank all of you for coming tonight. I use the metaphor of the bus because in Africa and particularly in Kenya, we travel a lot by bus. So I knew everybody would understand when I say that we are in the wrong bus. And in the metaphor, in the training, it was part of our training, what we call civic and environmental education. And we were trying to say that, I was trying to deliver the message to rural populations, many of whom are peasant farmers, that there is a way that we govern ourselves in a certain way. And there is a reason why we govern ourselves that way. And there is a reason why we manage our environment the way we manage our environment. And because of that, we have precipitated problems. And many of those problems they see. So I would usually start the seminar by asking them, which problems do you have in your communities? Either personal or community or even national problems. And I guess thinking I had a solution to the problems, they would give me a lot of problems. And we would list all of them. And I would use those problems to tell them that if you travel in the wrong direction, if you take a journey and you go to the right destination, you are likely to be happy, you are likely to be received well, you are likely to experience satisfaction because you arrived at the destination that you wanted to arrive at. But if you arrive at a destination and you find yourselves with a lot of... Thank you very much. But if you arrive at a destination and you find yourselves with a lot of problems, then you must have made some wrong decision. Maybe this is not the place you should have been. And so I said, I would use that bus and say, if you come to Nairobi, usually we held these seminars in Nairobi because we were also holding them when we were not allowed to be holding them. So we were hiding in holding them. So I would say, when you come to Nairobi, there are two ways you could go. You could go north and go towards Uganda, or you could go south and go towards Mombasa. Now, what would be the reason why when you go to the bus stop, you could take the wrong bus? That if you want to go to Mombasa, you could end up taking the bus that goes to Kampala. Because if you go to Kampala and you wanted to go to Mombasa, you will have a lot of problems in Kampala. You don't know anybody there, because you may be accused of loitering, and in Kenya, if you're caught loitering, you could end up in jail. But if you really want to go to Mombasa, and you take the right bus, then when you get to Mombasa, you will be okay, because that's where you wanted to go. And I would then draw their attention to the many problems they would have given me at the start. And I said, the reason why you have all these problems, is it because you are traveling in the right direction or in the wrong direction? And in unison, they would say, we are definitely traveling in the wrong direction. And then you begin analyzing why those problems are there and how they got there. And that was the concept. Then we would say, we are traveling in the wrong bus. And you could apply it to many, many issues. In fact, I've talked to many other people, not these peasant farmers, and I have discovered that a lot of us travel in the wrong bus.
Well, that's, you have you have many kind of very effective metaphors in this book. Another one is, I think, intentionally picked to be familiar to African audiences, which is the three-legged stool that we see, of course, everywhere. And you've talked about the three-legged stool needed to achieve good governance and really addressing governance issues. You've talked about democratic spaces, You talked about sustainability in natural resources, and then culture of peace and equity and civility. Could you talk about how you see the three of those coming together to address some of these larger frame challenges for Africa?
Yeah, as you say, I picked up on the traditional stool because, again, that's something that everybody can identify with. It's a very typical stool. You find it in many parts of Africa. And although it looks like a very fragile stool, once you sit on it, you feel supported, even though it doesn't have a back. But you feel quite supported. And the reason is because, one, the stool is made from the same log. And the stool, those legs are chiseled by a craftsman who doesn't first chisel one leg and then go to the next leg. He chisels all the three legs at the same time in order to create a balance. And eventually he creates a dip where you sit. And so when I would talk about that, everybody can understand that stool. And I would say that in every society, whether it is us or even in developed places, you have three main pillars that are very important for us to be a stable country. And I would say the first one is we all have our resources. We have water, we have land, we have forests. If we manage these, we have human, we have livestock, we have a lot of resources. If we manage these resources in a good way, that will be one leg of the stool. Then, of course, we have the way we manage ourselves. And quite often we will have discussed the management in the wrong birth syndrome. So now they will have known why we are managing ourselves badly and why we are having so many problems in our societies. And we say, if we do not manage ourselves properly, that's the third leg. And this leg means that we have to have, for lack of a better word, we have to have a democratic system of governance. A system that is inclusive, that does not divide us along ethnic lines. A system that respects our basic rights, such as the right to assemble. And at that particular time I mentioned we would be hiding because we did not have the freedom to assemble. So I would say if we had we need to have the freedom of assembly, the freedom of expression, the freedom of information, the freedom of movement, so that we can have, we can feel stable. That's the other leg. And the third leg is that there are many reasons why we can cultivate a culture of peace. We have to deliberately and consciously realize that we were put together in a superficial state by powers that were big, that were stronger than us. And they created a superficial state so that we found ourselves with the neighbors we didn't even know. And we didn't want to mix with them, but we were mixed. And almost 100 years later, we can't afford to go back and fight, to go back and decide who belonged here and who belonged there. That it is very important for us to have a deliberate and a conscious decision that we will live together peacefully. We will coexist together. And that way, we will be able to take care of ourselves. That's the third leg. And I would say if you have those three legs, then the dip on the stool is the environment, the milieu, the environment in which development will take place. Now people can come, they can give us aid, they can give us loans. We will develop. We can go to school, we can build universities, we can develop. And we can get rid of all these problems that we shall have listed and which would be hung on the wall. But if we don't have these three legs, no matter who comes and with whatever, we shall never develop. And that was for us the way we tried to make the link between good governance, environmental sustainability, and peace.
Let me ask you about that environment and good governance and peace, or in many times conflict linkages. I'm often asked, well, what does environment have to do with conflict or security? And starting in 2004, I had a very good answer, which was to point to your experience and the Nobel Peace Prize that you won, in a sense, for fighting the fight on the resources and the livelihoods that brought against poor governance, and it was a very violent reaction. So can you talk about how you've seen and, in fact, lived these environment, poverty, or livelihoods and conflict linkages?
In fact, once you understand that linkage, you begin to see those examples everywhere. You can begin to see them even within your own community. You begin to see them within your country and within the region. And the first time I experienced them was between my community, the Kikuyus, and the Maasai community in a place called Mai Mahiu, those of you who know Kenya. The Maasais, as you know, are herdsmen. And Maasais, from time immemorial, used to move from one place to the other in an expansive land with their animals until we became a colony of the British. And the country was subdivided. Sometimes communities found themselves on both sides of the border, like the Maasais do. And we introduced new concept of land ownership. We introduced title deeds. We introduced fencing. We introduced commercial agriculture. And a lot of these open commercial agriculture were established in the lands where Maasais used to graze. But as far as the colonial administration was concerned, if the Maasais were grazing at that corner, and several months later they are at that corner, then as far as the colonial administration was concerned, that was no man's land. There is nobody. But it's a Maasai country for grazing. Now, when we became a colony and we introduced the concept of land ownership that could be identified, first of all, the man is the head of the family and therefore the land has to be registered in his name. Secondly, you get a piece of paper, which we didn't have before, that says that that land is yours and you can do whatever you want with it. That introduced a potential area of conflict, because that means that the Maasai can no longer freely move from one corner of the land to the other, because there are people who own land in between. Secondly, they need water for the animals. Water comes from the mountains. If the people who live in the highlands are cutting down forest or are encroaching on the forest, and rivers stop flowing, or rainfall stop flowing, the people downstream are going to suffer from lack of water. So in this particular area, when it would be dry, the Maasais would approach the ridge of the Rift Valley, where there was grass, there was forest, and there was water. But in the last few years, maybe the last 15, 20 years, human settlement has come and has taken over those lands, because it was a big farm and it was sold to local people and they subdivided and they got their title deeds and they fenced it. And now the Maasais come because it's dry and their animals need grass and they need water, and they are driving their animals towards the ridge, and they confront human settlements, farmers, and the farmers say, you can't pass. This is my land. I bought it. I have a title deed. And as for the water that is coming from the mountains, we are using it for irrigation. We need it for irrigation. And a conflict ensued And on several occasions, people would be killed, and there would be a lot of political turmoil, and people would come and they would talk to the Maasais and the Kikuyus to try to create peace. And we kept saying, you can never create peace until you educate these people that they are fighting over resources, and that these resources need to be managed in a different way. The way we are managing them, they are propagating conflict. We need to manage them in a way that will not propagate conflict. We must find a solution that will preempt these conflicts that come every so often, and especially when the land dries up. So that was my first beginning of understanding the linkage between resources and conflicts and mismanagement of these resources. Because if the government was actually would take that matter and study it and negotiate with the communities, they could find a way of making sure that the Maasai's animals can reach the ridge, they can reach the water, and the Kikuyu farms would also be protected. But if you leave it to the communities themselves, they fight. They kill each other. The other example I had was during the elections. Every time during the elections, we would have tribal clashes. And the reason why we were having tribal clashes is because politicians want to gerrymander elections. And the best way for them to gerrymander elections was to go to their communities, that's their tribesmen, who have bought land in this Rift Valley, and tell them, these people who have bought land here don't belong here. They belong somewhere else. That's a governance issue. Because we have a constitution that says you can buy land anywhere in this country. So the constitution is neglected, and instead the politicians take up these issues, and they convince their people that everybody should be where they used to be before the British came. Now, it's not possible anymore. We have created a new nation. We have a new constitution. This is the 21st century. The only way we can survive is if we learn to govern ourselves in a way that will not discriminate and will not undermine the welfare of all people, not just a few people. And not allow politicians to take these issues and spin them during the elections. They did so in 1991, 1992, 1997. In 2002, we escaped because there was a big wave that eventually removed the government that was there before. But in 2007, those same issues acted out, instigated, instigated by the politicians. That's an issue of governance. And so for me, I started seeing in close quarters how if you have bad governance, that is governance which does not respect human rights, that does not respect the Constitution, that does not respect the diversity that is characteristic of every community, every country in Kenya, in Africa, that is not inclusive, that uses the tribe to attain power. And if you don't then, therefore, ensure that the resources within the country are equitably distributed, and you encourage these prejudgments that communities have against each other, you're going to have conflict. And it kept happening, and it kept happening, and I kept raising it, but nobody was paying me any attention. So I was very happy when the Norwegian Nobel Committee said, this girl has something going.
That's terrific. And now I saw, and you write very eloquently about how as a goodwill ambassador for the Congo Basin and the forest and that whole ecosystem, you point out that these dynamics are not just limited to within countries, but can be, again, when coupled with weak or poor governance, can be part of helping us understand how the conflict in DRC, particularly, Democratic Republic of the Congo, were some of these same dynamics, but with plenty of international actors as well.
Yeah, in fact, if you look in Africa, almost every war that has been fought in Africa, I'm glad to hear that President of Liberia will be here next week, and I'm sure she'll be sharing with you some of her experiences in trying to rebuild a country that was devastated. Almost every country in Africa has suffered from these type of conflicts. It's about resources. It's about gold. It's about diamonds. It's about forests. It's about oil, Darfur. It's about grazing land. It's about oil. Almost every conflict in Africa you can point at has something to do with competition of resources in an environment which has bad governance, and therefore that environment is unable to preempt conflict. And so, to me, this is why I wrote this book, because I really was challenging us as Africans to think outside the box and to begin to see why we seem to move forward. We make 2 steps forward and you make 1 step backwards. And so we look like we are not moving. Some of these issues are complex, they are difficult, but they have a lot to do with the way we have decided to manage our resources and to manage our politics and our economics.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about really what I think in many ways you received your award for, which was doing something about these problems, right? And the Greenbelt movement that you founded decades ago, with in some ways a very simple idea of planting trees, but as opposed to so many of our development efforts that stay in their narrow lanes, and the health people do health, the development people do development, the environment people do environment, you found ways to really make this an integrated or a multidisciplinary, or have a really diversified portfolio from this very specific intervention. Can you talk about how you do that in this kind of very modest act of planting a tree reaps benefits across many sectors and many areas?
Yeah, first of all, it is important to realize, and those of you who have followed the Greenbelt movement know this, that when I first started, I wasn't starting a movement. I was starting a small project to coincide with the very first International Women's Conference in Mexico in 1975. And I was trying to come up with a project that we can share in Mexico and also carry on for the next few years. I was in the University of Nairobi teaching. I was not supposed to be fooling around with women in the rural areas. But the minute I started, somehow it's as if I opened a Pandora's box. And it just kept going deeper and deeper. And every time I would pull a problem, and I thought, oh, this problem is also here. And I would continue looking for how do we get out of this, and how do we relate to what is happening at the national level. And eventually, although I started by saying to the women of the National Council of Women, let us plant trees to meet the needs that the women from the countryside are mentioning. The need for firewood, which is the main source of energy. The need for food. The need for clean drinking water. The need to stop soil erosion. Even though that's how we started, it very quickly became clear to me that these are symptoms. And therefore we needed to get to the causes. And it is in search of the causes that eventually led me into understanding how interconnected these issues were. And therefore to understand that because I'm dealing with a cause, if I'm trying to get I'm dealing with a symptom, to get to the cause, I can't deal with one at a time. I can't say, let us deal with governance this time, and don't worry about the resources. Or don't worry about peace today, let us worry, or conflicts that are going on, let us worry about management of resources. I saw that it was very, very important to use the tree planting as an entry point, because until the government saw that we were doing more than just planting a tree, we were perceived as a bunch of women just going around, digging holes, planting trees, watering them, who cares? But the minute we started the education program that I talked about, where we asked them for the problems, and we say, for example, we don't have water. Women need water. And we say, how come rivers don't have water? Because we want to help us understand the causes. That's what eventually led us to governance. That if you don't have good governance, you cannot protect the environment. You cannot protect the forest. As a matter of fact, we found out eventually that it was the very people who were supposed to protect the forest that were destroying them. That it was the very people who were supposed to protect the forest that we were privatizing them. And so the protector had become the predator. And to deal with just the symptoms was really to waste your time. You are wasting your time because those symptoms will continue coming. You have to go to the root cause. And it is going into the root cause that eventually showed us that it is not one root, that these are many roots, and some of these roots are anastomose. And therefore you need to have a big picture and not have a one picture. And that's also the reason why we said when we go into the community, even though it is the women who provide the drive for planting trees, partly because it is they who suffer when the environment is destroyed, it is also they who work in the field. Once we are in the community, we will have to deal with the women.
To come to your country, and specifically for having them tested in your country. What are you doing to help in that area?
Well, I'm not specifically doing anything at the moment for any of the companies. What we are trying to do, first and foremost, is really to raise awareness about global warming and the threat that it brings to the region, so that governments can rise up, can wake up to the fact that we need to adapt. Because until they do so, they wouldn't even be willing to invite such companies. And it is not even as if we don't have companies, for example, that are selling solar, that are selling wind energy, that are able to even invest in geothermal or even in hydropower. They're there. But if you have a government that is not prioritizing global warming and understanding the threat that global warming will bring, it will not prioritize these new technologies. But I'm hoping that once we go to Copenhagen, usually they will probably start waking up in June because the meeting is in December. But once we come out of Copenhagen, the mechanisms, the protocol that will be agreed on will be signed by those same governments, and I'm sure a lot of those African governments will be there. I'm sure my government will sign. And that protocol will be the one that will probably be the engine that will drive the need for adaptation. Because obviously, governments will have to agree. Those who are emitting have to cap. those who are not emitting have to adapt. And therefore, I think that the protocol will serve a very good purpose for providing the force that is needed at the national level. And it is for that reason that I'm actually very keen to have forests included in the protocol and not left out as one of the issues that can be discussed later on, because this will give us something to work with by in encouraging our governments to protect the forests.
Okay. Well, gentleman right there, and then we'll move over there, and then let's have the hand there.
Hello, Mama Maathai. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
I'm Elijah Joy, and I'm with Organic Soul Incorporated, and I promote green living, sustainable living to African Americans in the United States. And I wanted to know, is there more work that you would like to do to inspire African Americans and mothers like yourself and grandmothers to get involved in, and help green us out? Do what we got to do.
Well, I can only say that. First of all, I'm very happy about the enthusiasm in this country about the environment. I used to say even before that the fact that this country did not sign Kyoto Protocol was in some ways less important to me, because you were nevertheless so far ahead of many other countries which had signed the Kyoto Protocol in terms of the citizen involvement, in terms of state involvement, some of them even signing the Kyoto Protocol, in terms of city involvements. You were very, very good. You are really very ahead in terms of awareness and concern, even though your government had not signed. There are many other governments which signed the Kyoto Protocol, but they are doing zero. And they are not even energizing their citizens. But recently we were in Tokyo, and I was very impressed because we went to one city. I don't remember the name of that city. It may have been in Nagoya. But in that city, we found a very interesting and a very encouraging practice where old people who have retired are encouraged to come to the park and contribute by taking care of trees, planting trees, trimming hedges, planting flowers. And I asked whether they are paid. They said they are not paid, but then Japan is not a poor country. So they probably, it is just a way of engaging citizens. And I was amazed by the number of citizens who would come and take care. So even old people like me can get involved in community work. I think that even though you have a lot of trees in this country, I'm sure you can still plant a lot of trees, a lot of flowers, and in the communities. Many times we leave the communities to the county council or to the city council and decide that they're the ones who should plant trees. But I think every citizen should plant trees. In fact, in Japan, I was told that every one of us needs 10 trees to take care of the carbon dioxide we breathe out. And every one of you is breathing out carbon dioxide, if you didn't know. So you need a tree to take care of that carbon dioxide. And I was told we need 10 trees. So I hope every one of you here can count or can identify 10 trees. And if you didn't plant them, say thank you to those who planted them. But yes, there is a lot that even old people can do. And quite often, people say that the environment is an issue for white people. Because white people have nothing else to do. They have, they can go planting trees. But the truth of the matter is, the issue of environment is even more important to poor people. Because a lot of environmental degradation is happening in poor communities. And poor communities have a tendency to blame everybody else except themselves. And they're blaming even to say that their area doesn't have trees. Well, if your area doesn't have trees, plant them. So we need to let even poor communities know that the environment is an extremely important. This is true even in Kenya. Some people say, I'm poor. It is the rich people who should take care of the environment. It's the rich people who should be concerned about the environment. Well, the rich people, fortunately for them, they can adapt. But the poor people will not be able to adapt as fast. Those are the people that James Lovelock is very concerned about. So all of us need to be concerned about the environment. Whether we are young, we are old, it's wonderful to see children participating. And I want to encourage you all to encourage especially children to join the Billion Tree Campaign, which we launched with the United Nations Environment Program in 2006. And if you are anywhere near interested, you may be happy to know that we have just now, they just told me that we have hit 3 billion throughout the world. And we started with saying we wanted to plant 1 billion. So we have planted 3 billion. And I would like to encourage more people to join. Now, I don't know whether we are closing now because the questions, but I want to pitch in something that I should not forget. And that is something I learned in Japan. When we were in Japan, I was trying to tell the Japanese people that I learned in America. I was telling them a long time ago that it is very important for us to reuse, reduce, recycle. I learned it here in America. It's you who taught me, so if you don't know, I don't know. And I was telling them that even in Japan, this is the one message that I think is very important, especially for affluent societies. Reuse, reduce, recycle. And they told me that they have a concept which is called motainai. And motainai, they said, is a concept that emphasizes reuse, reduce, recycle, but also emphasizes gratitude. And we really have a lot to be grateful for. Respect and not wasting. Now, obviously, this must have happened before Japan became so rich, second richest country in the world. But it was amazing how that message was taken. And I was really surprised how, I don't know, that country is very interesting. That message was taken by the politicians. It was first and foremost picked up by Prime Minister Koizumi. He was the prime minister at that time. And he started talking about it. And he started saying, yes, the Japanese people should also use motainai, should rediscover that concept of motainai. It doesn't mean reduce your quality of life, but especially with the technology that you people have, it's quite easy and it's quite possible to reuse, reduce, recycle. And then when you come to our part of the world, respect. Do not waste. And let us be grateful. Thank you.
Well, it is with much gratitude and much respect that we say thank you today for sharing your insights and really your inspiration. I was touched here last year when in a session in New York, in fact, we were talking about greening the U.S., Van Jones, one of our leaders in green jobs and such, I think kind of unannounced, having never met you, announced to you that he'd named one of his children after you, in part because of this great inspiration that you've provided us with your work. work on the ground and your work in the high heights of the Nobel Peace Prize. So thank you very much for coming and sharing your insights with us.